How's it going, guys? I'm Rob Shaw, this is Raising Reef, and today I'm doing refugium maintenance. So this is the little tank that we're going to be doing maintenance on. This is a Micro Habitat 30 by TMC. It's sold as a standalone nano reef tank, but I'm using it as a remote refugium. Now it's a remote refugium because it's tied into the rest of my system, but it has its own tank. Quite often a refugium is built into the sump of the system out of sight. There's not enough room in my tank for that, so I've had to plumb one on the side. This also means that it's a display refugium. It's visible to anyone who's near the tank. So you tend to want to grow something that looks a little bit more attractive because it's on show. This is one of the reasons why I decided to grow caulerpa in this tank in opposed to, say, chaetomorpha, which is a lot easier to grow and there's less risk of it turning sexual. But it just looks like a giant green Brillo pad sort of spinning around in the tank. Not very attractive, isn't going to give the aesthetic that I was looking for. So we've switched that out and we've gone with caulerpa. This caulerpa's been running in here for about, must be 3 months now. It's done really well. It must be at least 4 times the size it was when I added it. What I noticed when I first added it to the system is I think the shock of being removed from where the refugium it was already in and then placing into my water, a lot of the original plant structure in like the leaves died back. Once these started to die back, they started to go a bit slimy and it looked like the whole thing was going to melt, but I just kept pruning off all of those dead bits and it started to grow new leaf, and 3 months later we've got a whole tank full of the stuff. This is causing a small problem for my reef lobster, which calls this little refugium home, and he's struggling to get out and about in amongst the thickets of caulerpa that are growing. So what I am planning to do is I'm going to thin this down. I'm going to take a little section away across here because his cave is behind that, and that's where I feed him. And I've noticed when I put the food in, he's struggling to get himself over to the front of the tank to pick out the food. So this is just going to make life easier for him. It also will make it easier for me to see him because he's quite elusive and he hides in the rock at the back. And apart from these times when he comes out to grab food, you don't really see much of him. Occasionally he might pop out. Also with the caulerpa, I run the light 24 hours a day. This helps to stop it going sexual. So being a nocturnal animal, the lobster tends to hide in the shade for nearly all of the time. If you're thinking of growing caulerpa yourself, check out, I'll put a card up there if I can work it out to do that, and there's a video that I've put out which is 3 ways to stop caulerpa from going sexual. Might be worth looking at that if you're thinking of adding caulerpa to your refugium. Other than that, I'm going to clean the front panel. I don't really do a great deal of maintenance on my refugium. There isn't a lot to be done. I thin out the algae as needed. I feed it when about 3 or 4 times a week, maybe a bit less than that, and I clean the front panel so that I can see in there. When the panel hasn't been cleaned for a while, you can see loads of little mysid shrimps scurrying around. There are also some little amphipods and stuff that find refuge within the refugium, which is the main point of a refugium, is to supply an area where all of these things can grow without predation. So there is a constant supply in here, which will filter back into the main display as food or just to help with that biodiversity that you're trying to create in this environment. If you was just relying on the main display, a lot of these little critters could be decimated by the fish population and other things living within the aquarium that would just eat them all, and there wouldn't be anywhere for them to reproduce. So that's enough talking about it. Let's get the maintenance done. So the first thing I need to do to gain access to the refugium is remove this, which is a light shield that I made out of some, I think it's like Cordex or something like that. I just use it to stop the light because the light's on 24 hours a day. It does bleed at night time across into the tank, and also it can be a distraction. So we've put that on there and that helps contain the light within the refugium itself. So first things first, let's get in there and clean the front panel so you might get a better view inside the refugium. Because this aquarium is made of acrylic, you have to use an acrylic safe algae pad in order to clean it, or you will scratch it. I have scratched this up because I tried to use a magnetic cleaner on it, which wasn't suitable, and it did scratch it up quite badly. So let's get in there and clean the front panel so we can get a better look at what's going on inside. Now, being such a small tank, it doesn't take very long to do maintenance on something of this size. Let's get rid of him. You get quite a lot of coralline growing within this tank. It's probably because the light is on 24 hours a day. So with the front glass all clean, we can now see inside a little better. If I zoom you in, you'll be able to get a better look at the algae itself. Where are we? There we go. What I found is because the flow that goes through the refugium is relatively slow, you can see a bit moving around now. It might help if I clean that, but let's get in there. But what you'll find is that on the leaves you get a little bit of what is like cyanobacteria, or some kind of, it feels like slimy bacterial growth if you just knock that off the leaves. So I like to go in there and just sort of swish it around, knock all of this loose debris off of the leaves, just so that it looks a lot nicer and the leaves can actually do their job of photosynthesizing and taking up the nitrates and the phosphates from the water. I won't go too mad with those bits because we're going to remove that section anyway. It's a good idea to get in and do this on a regular basis so that it doesn't overcrowd, and you also want to be splitting those long tendrils that grow into lots of leaves down into smaller clumps. That's all explained in the video that I did about stopping it from going sexual. But yeah, it's something that you definitely want to do on occasion if you are running caulerpa. So I have a pair of scissors that I use for the tank. Now I've gone a little bit rusty, but I do tend to try and rinse them and clean them between uses so they don't get too bad. But I'd like to go in there and just cut the tendrils. I think this is growing actually under the what I'm doing is just clearing that away, and I'm going to remove this section out of the tank. As you can see there, that it's rooted itself right into the sand. Pull that up, you can see all of that, and just shake some of the sand off of that. And I can remove that out. It's quite new growth there, so what I might actually do is just plonk this over here for now and bury it in the corner. I'm going to try and pull up all of the roots here to try and stop it from just growing back quickly and then causing the same problem for one, me seeing Bob, and two, oh, if I didn't mention that before, the reef lobster's name is Bob, I inherited him from a friend of mine who used to keep him in his reef tank, but he shut up his reef tank and went travelling, and he donated Bob to me to look after. And I've now had Bob for probably about nearly 3 years, I should imagine. Yeah, probably about 3 years. Maybe a little bit longer. So that is pretty much what I was hoping to do in this little bit of maintenance. Let's see if we can get some of this algae cleaned up. The leaves of this caulerpa are they feel a bit plasticky. They've got quite a strong structure to them. And this particular type, as you can see, grows very long leaves. As I mentioned in the video that I did, you get other varieties that are like a grape type and a feather type. I would have liked to have got some of those because they can be a little bit more interesting looking, to have some different types in there. It is possible that even with a variety you'll end up with one strain that grows quicker and outcompetes all of the others, but it's nice to start off with those. Also, there are loads of different other algae that you can get to add to a refugium. And when you're doing the maintenance, sometimes you see leaves that are sort of damaged or died off. I like to just get into the bottom of there and snap them off at the base and pull them out. Just allows room for new leaves to grow, and it just looks a little bit nicer. It's a bit like going and pruning your garden, a bit like deadheading. Encourages new growth and it just looks tidier. So there you have it. Let's zoom out a little bit. There you go. So that's pretty much what I wanted to do. I haven't taken too much out at the moment. There's still plenty of space for it to grow, and I've separated up that clump from the rest of it, which should help to make it stay a smaller, if colony is the right word, or a smaller thicket, and that should stop it from going sexual also. So that's about it for cleaning the front glass and thinning out the algae. I'll give the algae a bit of a clean as well to make sure that I've knocked off any of that loose build up of bacteria, or whether it's a slime algae or whatever it is, just to make it look a bit nicer. I've made the water a little bit cloudy, but that'll clear quite quickly. Now you can see the rock at the back, which is where Bob lives underneath. So when I feed the reef lobster, you'll be able to see him come out and get his food. So if I move you over a little bit and zoom in, you might be able to get a good look at Bob. Let's see. I'll just pop some. These are just marine pellets. Bob seems to like them. So we'll pop some of them in there and you'll be able to see Bob. When he plucks up the courage, he will pop out and come and grab some. So one more job that we have to do is just get into the little grate at the back, and I like to just give that a scrub with my toothbrush. So that's pretty much the maintenance done on this tank. The only other maintenance that I might be able to do on this tank would be to take out the return pump that's in the back chamber, which circulates water throughout the aquarium, and also the main pump that pumps the water up here. I could take them off, give them a clean. Doesn't need to be done every time I do maintenance on the tank, but it's prudent to do it on a regular basis to make sure that those little pumps are working at their best. So if we move up to the main tank, I can show you a few things that I did on that tank last week. So last weekend was maintenance on the main display, and during that time I did the first water change this tank has had for over 4 months. I had some water to use up and I was starting to feel a bit guilty about not doing it. I didn't want to get a few months down the line, start experiencing a problem and think to myself, if only I'd done a water change sooner. So I got the water change done. I changed about 50 litres on this tank. This whole tank system is about 200 litres or so, so it's a 25% water change, and that should see it over for another few months. Whilst I was doing that water change, I did get into the tank and address a few little issues. The newest addition to this tank was a scroll coral, which was also, I think it had either a stylophora or a postlepora coral attached to it. This hasn't been doing so well in the tank. I bought it because I used to have a scroll coral and I sold it on when I shut down my big tank before I was going to set this up. I would have taken a little frag and grown it on for this tank, but I'd already let it go. When one came up, they don't come up very often, or I don't see them very often, I decided to get it. I didn't really have a specific place to put it, so it kind of just got sort of wedged in. It didn't like the position very well and it started to recede. What we're left with now, the stylo seems to be doing okay. It's not really growing, but it hasn't receded at all, but the scroll coral has. It's little patches around what was quite a decent sized piece. I ended up breaking that down into smaller pieces and remounting that onto another piece of rock that I had, and that's now in a new position. There is the slightest little evidence of some healing around the edge that looks like new growth, so I'm crossing my fingers and hoping that that makes a full recovery and starts to then spread back out again. Other than that, I had to attend to what was a long-standing issue with one of my chalice corals, which was getting some aggression from its neighbours, and initially a big section of it had died back where the lobo that was next to it had eaten it. It then started to re-heal and it almost completely recovered, so I left it, but ultimately the inevitable happened and the attack came back and it ate some more of it. This was worse than the first time, and so I've remounted that. In the process it broke into 2 pieces, so I've remounted 2 pieces in 2 different areas, and that should give it a chance to heal and regrow with a little bit more space. The tuxedos continue to taunt me with their floral headdresses of purple clove polyp, but yet still don't eat it. So the pink plating Monty that I've got is starting to spread quite rapidly. The edge of that is getting stung by my torch coral, which stings anything that gets too close to it. And there's a section at the top which is starting to overgrow other Montiporas around it, and I'm going to need to get in there and trim that back at some point in the future. Other than that, the tank continues to do well, and so much so that with the refugium running now with the caulerpa and the caulerpa growing well, I've noticed that I haven't had to replace my phosphate remover that's in my media reactor. This has now not been replaced for probably 4 months or so, maybe a little bit longer than that. And what I've decided to do is remove that reactor. It's one less pump to run, one less plug socket that I've got to use, and we'll see how the tank gets on without phosphate remover, relying on the refugium and this tiny amount of biopearls that I've got running in another reactor next to it. So we'll remove that now, and we'll see how we get on. So under the sump we've got the 2 TMC reactors that I use, one for biopearls and the other for my phosphate remover. Like I say, the phosphate remover hasn't been changed for over 4 months. I reckon it's about 5 months. I can't remember exactly, but it's been a very long time. So we're assuming that it's not doing anything, and it hasn't been for a while. The caulerpa's growing, taking nutrients out of the water. The biopearls are tumbling. Presumably they're doing something as well. We can remove this canister out of the water. The beauty of these little canisters is that you can just remove them straight away without disconnecting the pump. So that's the little chamber. It's filled with Phosguard, which is this stuff, Seachem's Phosguard. It's an aluminium based phosphate remover. It works really well. I prefer using that to other phosphate removers like GFO because it's not as messy. it doesn't take a lot of rinsing in order to clean. It's quite clean product. You just wash the dust off of it and it's good to go. So I'll remove out the rest of this reactor and see how we get on without it. So with the reactor removed, all that's left to do is give it a clean up and store it away for future use. So that concludes the maintenance on this tank for this week. The refugium's looking nice again. Bob can get to his food. I've removed the reactor from the sump and I can just enjoy my tank for another week without worrying about maintenance. So I hope you enjoyed this video looking at what it takes to look after my refugium. Take it easy guys, and I'll see you in the next one.